Human rights activists say the Philippine government is not living up to its promises to stop abuses by the military. Is Benigno Aquino failing in his pledge to get tough on the army? This is Inside Story. Hello, a warm welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Well, during his campaign for president, Benigno Aquino III promised to end serious violations of human rights in the Philippines. Since taking office just over a year ago, the Philippine military continues to be implicated in several human rights violations, including torture, disappearances, and execution-style killings. A report now by Human Rights Watch says the Philippine government is failing to investigate and prosecute abuses by the military. From the Philippines capital, Marga Ortigas reports.
Grace is afraid for her life. She says the military might be after her because she was there when a group of soldiers killed her father's friend. It was her father they came for, suspecting him of being a communist rebel. But when they didn't find him, they took his friend instead.
They beat him inside our house and then took him outside and shot him. Once in the head, in the neck, and then in the chest. They were laughing when they left.
There are communist insurgents in Grace's home province, and the military has been fighting them for decades. Anyone suspected of being a communist sympathizer isn't treated kindly, and many civilians say they live in fear of being terrorized by the military. When President Benigno Aquino III took office a year ago, he promised to put an end to human rights violations by men in uniform. But there have been as yet no notable convictions of military officers for such violations, and the reports of abuse continue.
Nothing is swept under the rug. They're all investigated, and where warranted, charges are filed. But at the same time, we recognize also that the security forces are so vulnerable to getting frivolous suits.
But there is nothing frivolous about Grace's accusation. She says she's not the only one who's scared and worries that justice will never be done.
Every time my mom and my siblings see the military, they're afraid because soldiers do bad things. They kill people. They've always tortured civilians, and it's still the same.
The darkness has given Grace the courage to break her silence and hope others will do the same. She says it's only by speaking out and continuing to demand justice that a long history of violence and abuse can finally be stopped. Marga Ortigas for Inside Story, Manila.
Well, let's take a closer look now at the findings of the report. The army continues to kill and abduct leftist activists under President Benigno Aquino, according to the findings of Human Rights Watch. It also says investigations have stalled, especially when evidence led to the military, and that the country's witness protection program is inadequate, leaving witnesses open to intimidation. Well, joining us now to talk more about this are our three guests. In Leeds, Tom Smith, a visiting lecturer at De La Salle University in Manila. In Manila, Ed Lingao, multimedia director of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. And in London, Filipino journalist Jean Alcantara. Welcome, all three of you, to the program. Good to have you with us. Jean Alcantara in London, if I could start with you. What do you make of the findings of this report? Any of this surprise you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome this report because we need to make sure that the issues raised by the report are kept in the minds of the international arena. It's been apparently very quiet for quite a while since the president's assumption into power. So although now we see that there's been no action, at least people are raising it so that hopefully it will embarrass the government to make sure that some action is taken.
Ed Lindau in Manila, why isn't the government doing a lot more to improve the record of human rights abuses in the country?
Well, at the outset, the president declared or made very specific declarative statements against all human rights abuses. That much we can give him, and it seems that he seems to be very sincere in opposing all human rights abuses. However, the disappointment from a lot of groups, whether media groups or human rights groups, comes from the fact that a lot more could have been done by the president in the past 14 months. In this respect, we're talking about cracking down on political clans, on warlords, on the military excesses, as well as on on other abuses by local government officials. We are not seeing that. We're just seeing statements of sincerity, which is good, which is a good start, but it has to be taken far beyond that.
Tom Smith in Leeds, if I could turn to you on this. I mean, it's one thing to talk about wanting to crack down on this, but words have to be met with actions. And so far, there doesn't seem to have been much action from the Philippine president.
The Philippines finds itself in a real period of transition at the moment, and not to be an apologist for the Aquino administration at the moment, but they're really trying to get to grips with some of the leftover problems from the past administration of Gloria Arroyo. And at the moment, it's been very difficult for Benjamin Aquino to really move forward with much of his hardline stance that he's taken on corruption. Many of it left over from the Arroyo administration, but some of it newly in place by some of his new members of his cabinet. And we've seen him trying to put out many fires in many different directions. Like I said, this period of transition should change in the future, given his hard stance. He's again looking to the United States for support in different areas of good governance, but at the moment, progress is slow. And much like Obama in America, this is a politician that run with a great deal of hope and optimism, and people are quite rightly asking when the results will come.
Yeah, let's send that back to Gina Alcantara in London. Is it more a question of Benigno Aquino needs a lot more time to really tackle this problem, and 1 year isn't long enough?
Well, I mean, obviously he's got a few more years in his term. The problem is people are impatient. And I think what he needs to do is really show that he can tackle things, on a step-by-step basis, little by little, rather than going for the big solutions. Interestingly, Tom was talking about the United States. The corruption in the military, which is obviously related to the disrespect for human rights, was only revealed early this year when the United States banned a general's wife from entering the United States because she was carrying so much of the money of the Philippines.
Ed Lindau, the Philippines unfortunately has a very lamentable record on human rights. It's a long history that goes back long before Benigno Aquino, back to the Marcos era. So is it really unrealistic to expect any great improvements to be made at this stage? I mean, does it need a lot more time than this?
That's an interesting question. Let me put it this way. We have had a big problem of weakening of our national institutions since the time of President Marcos. And then there was President Arroyo, who further weakened these institutions. I'm talking about the courts, about the police, about the army, about peace and order and security officials. So what President Aquino faced in his first 14 months in office was an incredible problem of having to build up these institutions. Now having said that, I think what a lot of Filipinos would ask of the president at this point is not just making declarative statements. They would ask him to, for example, give a stronger show of national authority in the local level, because that is where it is lacking. If you notice, most of these killings are done on the local level. In the time of Marcos, in the time of President Arroyo, some of these killings were done to be on the national level. Now that has been sort of resolved. But the enforcement, the authority has to be devolved down to the local level where much of the killings are taking place. If you take note, in the local levels, you have a lot of mayors, congressmen who act like virtual kings, and they have no respect at all for Manila.
All right, let's talk about. Let's go back to this. Sorry, if you want to respond to this, Tom Smith.
Yeah, I would certainly echo those feelings. I mean, we have to remember when we're talking about the Philippines, this is a country of almost 100 million people that are scattered over almost 7,000 islands. It's very easy for developed countries to forget about how difficult sometimes the physical geography of the Philippines is, and the problems that we see in the south, in Mindanao in particular. Just recently, we've seen another outbreak of kidnapping and violence down in the south, and this mainly has to do with the distance from Manila, from central government. So looking to Noynoy Aquino to kind of solve these problems down in the south, which is 400 miles away, is just logistically very, very difficult. Even for a Western government with unlimited supplies and abilities would find such tasks very difficult. So a developing nation as poor as the Philippines is obviously going to struggle with these things, and we can't expect things overnight. But at the same time, I would recognise that the local problems remain very much local problems, and we shouldn't exaggerate these to be huge national agenda problems. These have been local problems since the Second World War, in particular. The New Republicans Army, the communist insurgencies, as well as the southern insurgencies of the MILF. These are very local problems which remain local problems rather than spreading like wildfire as global problems.
All right, we'll pick up on that in just a moment, but I want to get to back to this report again just for a moment, if I can, and talk about, if I can, and talk about some of the recommendations here. The Human Rights Watch report makes some broader recommendations to the Philippine government to end these human rights violations throughout the country. It says the government should investigate and prosecute all those responsible in each case of extrajudicial killing. It should order the Inspector General and Provost Marshal of the Armed Forces of the Philippines to investigate and report publicly within 90 days on the involvement of military personnel in extrajudicial killings, and also order the military to cease targeting all civilians. And in addition, the government should communicate fully to all military personnel who provide evidence or testimony in cases of human rights violations. Gian Alcantara, what do you make of some of those recommendations? Are those pretty much easier said than done?
Well, obviously, you make recommendations like that, which they think will just solve everything. They're not really so easy to do. One thing which, I take umbrage with Tom's word is that the killings in the national regions are not as important. They are important because all the killings that happen, they add up to an atmosphere where the military particularly act really with impunity, as everyone keeps saying in the media. We have to begin somewhere, and with the international body like Human Rights Watch getting involved, and hopefully even the other international institutions like the EU and so on, if they put some conditions in the way that the Philippine government does things, I think hopefully we'll get somewhere.
Tom Smith, do you think the international community needs to do a lot more here to apply pressure on the Philippine government?
It can certainly apply more pressure, and I think, for one, Nonoy Aquino will welcome that pressure. I would think someone of a liberal persuasion like him would welcome this report. Acting on that report, and as much pressure as the international community might want to put on Nonoy Aquino's administration, there's very little that he could do in a short-term view. We've seen recent judges, members of the clergy being dragged into the mire with recent exposés about corruption. So it's going to be very difficult for them to turn around and make these recommendations a reality in 90 days when you don't trust the very institutions of government that would be needed. And of course, this goes back to the point of those being regional. I do certainly think those regional conflicts are very important, but they're not national conflicts. The Philippines is not at war nationally. These are very local ideas. And so how are we going to legislate for these very parochial and small regional areas on a national level? That's a question that the Philippines has been wrestling for since its creation.
Ed Lindau, is it worth his while? And I'm talking about Benigno Aquino here. Is it worth his while politically to really go after these people? I mean, does he have any real political capital with which to work with here?
Definitely. So you're talking about institutions which have been weakened over the past 3 or 4 decades, and these are institutions that he has to rebuild and reinforce. And when you talk about institutions, even though they're institutions that are right now problematic at the local level, these are national institutions, whether they're the courts, whether they're the police. The police is Philippine National Police. The army is a national army. And these are, you cannot avoid the fact that these are national agencies. Also, the thing about local conflicts, these are not really local conflicts. You're talking about the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the Moro National Liberation Front, the New People's Army, and when you talk about these things, you're talking about things like changing the constitution, peace talks on the national level. These are not local conflicts. These are not local problems, and so it has to be taken at a broader perspective. Now, granted that the president needs more time. We all give him that. He needs more time, but I think what a lot of people are looking at is that he was given an immense amount of political capital last year. he had the most number of votes in Philippine history. In the history of Philippine elections, he had the most number of votes. He had people were the most optimistic with the entry of his administration, and so with that he could barter that political capital in going after, for example, local warlords without having to worry about getting re-elected or getting his people re-elected, because first of all, he has only one term. Secondly, compared to Gloria Arroyo and Erap Estrada, he still started off with a much better amount of political capital.
Gina Alcantara, if I could turn back to you on this, is Benigno Aquino even the right man for this job? I mean, he was before he got elected as Philippine president. He was a senator in the Philippine Senate for a number of years, and by all accounts, he had a pretty undistinguished record. And his critics say he's basically trading on his name. The son, of course, of Corazon Aquino, who was a very popular president in the Philippines, who helped to oust Marcos, and of course, his father was somebody who fought for democratic rights and ended up paying for it with his life. But so is he basically trading on that Aquino brand name?
I think he definitely does, because remember, he was a reluctant president, a reluctant presidential candidate, and the thing with the family, if you like, when his mother was put into power, she was seen as, if you like, a holy character, and really the things that happened in the country in terms of corruption and all these problems were to do with what they called kamag-anak limited, which is relatives limited. It's almost like a mafia term. So he may be able to do things himself. He may have the will to do things, but he is surrounded by people who may have different interests. In fact, he's apparently now surrounded by two factions. Both of them are his supporters, but I guess mutually exclusive of one another. And you question, are they actually working for his benefit or for the benefit of the Filipino people or for the benefit of their own groups, particularly in view of the forthcoming elections in a few years' time?
Tom Smith, do you agree with that assessment?
I do, yes, certainly so. There's been lots of political infighting in the Aquino administration. And the hard line that Aquino has took in trying to root that out will take time. The second point, really, I would like to make is the fact that there's only so long he will be able to blame the last person who held office. If we say that period will last a year, which is usual for most administrations, then that period is coming to an end. With the problem still lasting beyond that period, though, it's going to be very difficult to see how he can really renew some of that support that he got early on in his presidency, which he may have already cashed in. But I would certainly say he's the best person for the job. If we look at some of the other candidates that ran for the presidency, I mean, is anybody really going to seriously suggest that Joseph Estrada should be given the presidency again? I don't think that's very likely. Dick Gordon, there are some other interesting candidates out there, but at the moment, Aquino looks like the only horse in town.
But yeah, so it seems from what you're saying, I mean, you're basically saying he's just the best of a bad bunch. He's the best one because he's the only one who isn't tainted by any corruption.
I certainly think he has characteristics which we shouldn't dismiss outright. He has a strong liberal pedigree. He certainly spoke very cleverly about how the country could move forward with some good governance ideas, certainly with some reconciliation ideas on the South, which have yet to really come to any flourishing. I'd like to see him talk really more openly to the MILF and try to get a ceasefire to some of the recent violence and really get a roadmap going towards peace in the South. These are some areas where he could show some concrete leadership, which would at least alleviate some of the immediate pressures.
Ed Lindau, do you still believe that Benigno Aquino is the right man for this job?
Definitely, I think he is. And, well, given the choices that we had in 2010, we think that he still is the best man for the job. But having said that, I think a lot of Filipinos are looking for stronger, more decisive leadership. Unfortunately, the perception, I will tell you, it is a perception, whether it's true or not, it's anybody's guess. There's still the perception among a lot of Filipinos that he's a bit laid back. And that doesn't help if, for example, the national government does not seem to be very well connected to the local governments. So the national government presence is not going to be felt in the local government level. So we may need the president to be a bit more decisive, more firm when he says that he wants a stop to these human rights abuses and these media and human rights killings. Then he should back it up, do something stronger, build the stronger institutions by reinforcing them with not just words but concrete actions.
How do you assess his relation? Sorry, Tom Smith, you want to respond?
Yeah. I think a good example with that would be there's a case going through the courts at the moment about the Maguindanao massacre last year, in which many people, including journalists, were killed very brutally. And that case of the Apatan clan is going through the courts at the moment. There has been some legislative problems with some corrupt judges, and really Noynoy could pin his colours to the mast with that case and say this will be a high watermark for further justice in the Philippines, for further violence, and that the perpetrators will be caught. There's a concrete example which will be going through the courts in the next few weeks and months, in which he could really come out and be vociferous in his support for, further redemption for the Philippines.
Ed Lindau, what's your response to that? I mean, Tom Smith talks about the Maguindanao massacre and the efforts to put those responsible for that to justice. Whatever comes out of that,
Yes.
could that be
Yes.
a benchmark for future efforts to go after corruption and all of these abuses of human rights?
Well, yes and no. I have to look at it from both ends. Yes, in the sense that the case really has moved quite fast, considering the number of accused, and the number of victims, the number of suspects, and the number of the witnesses involved. It is moving relatively fast compared to other cases. But no, in the sense that it's a very unusual case where you have 58 people massacred. It's it blew up in front of everybody else. So what you have is a specific case which is very unusual, which is good because it gets attention. But what about the other cases which are individual cases? That is where we will see the nitty-gritty. That is where you will see whether the institutions really will work when you're talking about one victim or two victims as against 58 victims. So I would just have to be a little bit careful with that one.
Jean Alcantara, does this, just in the couple of minutes or so that we have left, does this basically come down to Aquino's relationship with the army? Does he fear them too much to be able to really try to clean them up? Because the army is still a very powerful institution in the Philippine government for much of this Philippines' modern history.
Obviously, Mr. Aquino has to work well with the military, but the Philippines, whether we like it or not, is a bit of a macho society, and I think Mr. Aquino needs to show that he has guts, and people can see that he is a man of action. Maybe he should take a leaf out of Mayor Duterte's actions in Davao, where this mayor just punched a sheriff in the face repeatedly, apparently for not doing things he wanted. I mean, I'm not saying that he should do that, but show something that people can see that he is a man of action, that he can achieve things, and hopefully that he can change things. Obviously, in the little things that he could affect, that would then affect the whole country eventually.
Ed Lindau, just briefly in the minute we have left, you concur with Jean Alcantara there? I saw you nodding to some of that. I mean, does he need to make some grand gesture to show that he's in charge?
Well, not really some grand gesture. I wouldn't want him punching anybody because then you would have another human rights abuse case. I'm looking at measures that have to do with for example, getting the prosecutors to build more airtight cases, getting the Philippine National Police to really go after people with arrest warrants. You have so many people with arrest warrants who are just floating around. Getting the military to finally produce people who are missing after the courts have ordered that they be shown to the public, and they still have not. These are possibly concrete steps that he could take. These are things he could do in gamble away portions of his popularity and get positive results.
All right, that is going to have to be the last word. We are unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank all three of our guests for taking part. Tom Smith, Ed Lindau, and Jean Alcantara. Many thanks for your time. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions as always. You can email them to us anytime at Al Jazeera, at Inside Story rather, at aljazeera.net. Bye for now.